Okay, so welcome to Lingo Live's Spanish course for beginners. In this course, you are going to learn basic Spanish by following some video tutorials and some quiz questions that will test your understanding of the concepts that have been presented in these tutorials, all with the goal of progressing from our white belt level to our yellow belt level of proficiency, which essentially means you've gone from a total beginner that doesn't know much Spanish at all to someone who can at least understand the basic concepts and communicate at a very basic fundamental level. And in addition, you also have the opportunity to practice what you're learning with some of our live native instructors all over the world. We have instructors in Argentina, Guatemala, Peru, Spain, and Mexico who can teach you through one-on-one sessions over Skype, but we will not be making that a focus of the course on its own. You'll have to do that directly from our website. So with that, let's get started with the first lecture.
Hola, there are several ways to introduce yourself in Spanish, so we'll start by looking at a few. For example, hola, me llamo Jesse. This phrase literally is saying, I call myself Jesse. Another possibility being the phrase soy Jesse. Soy Jesse. Literally this is saying I am Jesse. And yet another option is to say something like hola, mi nombre es Jesse. This you're literally saying my name is, and then your name. My name is Jesse. Mi nombre es Jesse. To ask somebody what their name is, you may then ask the question, ¿Cómo se llama usted? ¿Cómo se llama usted? How do you call yourself, basically, or what do you call yourself? Or, okay, so this would be used with somebody that you are probably meeting for the first time. Maybe somebody of authority or respect, but in general, when you're meeting somebody for the first time, there's a social distance, so we use the more formal question, ¿Cómo se llama usted? But if it's maybe somebody in a class that you're taking or somebody less formal, we may then just use the more informal version here. ¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Cómo te llamas? Maybe you meet them at a party. ¿Cómo te llamas? Versus ¿Cómo se llama usted? Then there are several expressions that you may use to tell somebody that you are pleased to meet them. So for example, the expression here, mucho gusto. So for example, mucho gusto, Maria. If you're pleased to meet Maria, it gives me much pleasure, is what you're saying. Or, es un placer, Maria, meaning it is a pleasure, literally. Es un placer. Or you may say that you are literally something like enchanted. So, encantado. If you are a male, you say encantado. And if you are a female, you say that you are encantada. Again, we have this masculine, feminine thing going on. Encantado or encantada. So I would say something like encantado, Maria. And then when responding to somebody saying, nice to meet you, it's typical to either respond with a similar expression like mucho gusto, es un placer, o encantado. So if I say mucho gusto, Maria, she may say mucho gusto, Jesse. Or another option would be to say the phrase igualmente, which means something like likewise, equally, likewise, igualmente. So if I said mucho gusto, Maria, she may respond in kind with igualmente, Jesse. Obviously, these conversations can be played out in a number of different ways in real-life scenarios, but let's take a look at one possibility. Okay, so let's say there's this person here that I want to introduce myself to. So I may approach them and say something like, hola, mi nombre es Jesse. ¿Usted cómo se llama? Again, I use the usted form because it's somebody, maybe I'm at a conference and it's the first time we're meeting. So it's more formal to start. We may switch to informal later, but they would respond how? Well, it's likely that they would say something like, right, mucho gusto, Jesse. Pleased to meet you, Jesse. And then they would probably go on to tell me their name. Me llamo Esteban. And then I would probably reply in kind, saying that it's nice to meet him as well. Something like, encantado, Esteban. Again, if I were a woman, I would have said encantada, but I am not, so I said encantado. Hola, buenos días. These are some common expressions you can use to greet people in Spanish. Buenos días, meaning good morning, and hola, being hello. Buenos días is only used in the morning time. So if you wanted to greet somebody in the afternoon, you might say hola, buenas tardes. And if you wanted to greet somebody in the evening, you might say something like hola, buenas noches. So buenas tardes literally meaning like good afternoon, and then buenas noches being good evening or good night. You might also greet somebody by asking them how they're doing. So for example, the question ¿Qué tal? ¿Qué tal? How are you doing? Or ¿Cómo estás? Again, how are you doing? Can both be used to greet somebody or just ask them how they're doing. These are rather informal greetings, but if you did happen to run into somebody that was maybe your boss or somebody just a little bit older that you wanted to show respect to, or that somebody you're just not that familiar with in general, you might use ¿Cómo está? Instead of these. So this would be more the formal way to say how are you doing. And this difference between the informal and the formal here we'll go over in another video. But just for now, know that with your friends, you pretty much are going to use ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? And with somebody who's not maybe just an acquaintance or somebody that's a little bit older, like I said, or has power over you like your boss, you would probably want to stick to ¿Cómo está? ¿Cómo está usted? You could throw that in there as well. And if somebody asks you how you're doing, or if you ask somebody how they're doing, you're probably going to expect one of these quick little responses, something like mal, being bad, or bien, being well and doing well, or a variation here, right, very badly, muy mal, or very well, muy bien. Or if you're just somewhere in the middle, you'll probably hear something like más o menos. And don't forget to be polite. You can use the word gracias, thank you. So you might say something like, how are you doing? ¿Cómo estás? And they may say something like, muy bien, gracias. Or you might use, there are several cognates out there too that would help you get through these little conversations, like the word excelente, maybe you're doing really well, excelente. Or maybe something, simple like a little tired, un poco cansado. So if you're sleepy here, right, you want to get some Z's, you might be un poco cansado. But this brings up another point in Spanish, that if you're talking about yourself, cansado here describes yourself, it ends in an O. So if you're a man, you say cansado, but if you're a woman, you say cansada. And we'll talk more about this idea of masculine and feminine in another video. But just know that if you say you're tired and you're a man, you say cansado, and if you're a female, you say cansada. These other ones, like excelente, mal, más o menos, bien, they don't end in O, so you don't have to worry about changing it between O and A. And don't worry too much if these concepts are a little confusing in the beginning. So then anyway, a simple way to pass the question back is by saying ¿Y tú? And basically, how about you and you? Or if it's, right, that's if it's, your friend, or if it's informal, but if it's formal, then you may say, instead of ¿Y tú? ¿Y usted? Okay? So then when you pass the question back, they may respond in the same way that you did, with muy bien or muy mal, probably something bien or mal, or bien or muy bien, or if they pass it to you, you can say the same. And of course, there are several ways to wrap up a quick little encounter. For example, saying adios, goodbye, or some variant thereof, something like hasta luego, or maybe ciao, or perhaps nos vemos. They all basically have the meaning of, see you later, adios being goodbye, literally, or to God you go, hasta luego being until later, ciao, borrowed from Italian, now with Spanish writing, meaning goodbye, and nos vemos meaning we see each other. So we'll see each other soon. Nos vemos. Of course, these are not the only ways to say goodbye. For example, you may hear something like cuídate, like take care, right, or any number of other possibilities that you might be aware of, that you may hear. So basically, you may end up with a conversation looking something like this. So if my friend asked me, or said to me, for example, greeted me with hola, buenos días, I may respond with buenos días, ¿qué tal? And they may be likely to respond something like muy bien, gracias, ¿y tú? And I could respond saying something like un poco cansado, pero bien, gracias. And then after a while of our conversation, we may wrap it up saying something like hasta luego, and ciao.
So personal pronouns are the way that you refer to certain people. So you say, for example, in English, I, you, we'd say, he or she. We say we, you all. You might say y'all if you're in Texas. And then we say they is kind of the plural of he, she. So we see here we've got two columns. We're going to put singular up here. Singular meaning just one person. And then plural meaning several people. The other thing I'm going to write over here is 1, 2, and 3 for first person, second person, and third person of each of these pronouns. Now in green, we're going to write Spanish translation of these. I in Spanish is yo. You in Spanish is tú. And then he and she in Spanish is él and ella. Now, if you have experience learning these pronouns in Spanish, you'll know that there's an important concept that we haven't talked about yet, and that is the concept of formality and how you refer to somebody who maybe is somebody that you want to be a little bit more formal or proper or polite with. In Spanish, you have the concept of formal, both verb conjugations and pronouns. So a formal pronoun in Spanish, if you want to speak to somebody and you want to say you would say usted instead of tú. So you see here we wrote tú for you, but then I wrote usted down here. And the reason I wrote usted in the third person is that when you use verbs with usted, the way that those verbs are conjugated or the way that the verbs change for usted is very similar. It's exactly the same as él and ella. So it is the third person conjugation or change to the verb that is used for usted, for the formal situation. Now the easiest way to think about this in English is, let's say, you're talking to a friend and you say, you walk to the store. Just present tense, talking about what's happening right now. You walk to the store. If you were speaking to your boss, or if you were speaking to maybe your grandmother, somebody that you want to be formal with, maybe a friend's parents, you would say you walk to the store to them as well. And then if you wanted to say he or she walks, you would say he, she walks to the store. Well, in Spanish, literally what happens is that with a formal version of you, like let's say you're talking to your boss, instead of saying you walk to the store, you literally say usted and then walks. So you use the kind of third person version of the verb. So you don't need to worry about understanding that concept completely now, but it's good that we introduce you to it, and it's important that you understand why I've written usted down here in the third person is because it is used in the language in the same way that he or she is used. So we've looked at the singular. Now let's look at the plural translations. So we in Spanish is nosotros. You all is vosotros. And then they, if you were talking about, a group of guys walking, you'd say they walk. In Spanish, you say ellos for they, if it's guys. And then if it's girls, say ellas. Now, people will say, well, what if you have, a girl and a guy walking? Well, in that case, you would use ellos. And in fact, in any case where you have at least one guy in the group that you want to refer to as they, you would say ellos. So you could have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women who walk to the store together, and you'd say ellas for those women. Ellas caminan for walk. They walk. But if you just throw one guy in there, then all of a sudden it is ellos. As long as there's one male, then you use ellos. And I'm sure that the women who are listening are probably not too happy to hear that. But for simplicity's sake, it makes it very easy just to know that as long as there's one male, you'd use ellos. And then you'd also use it for other nouns where, you have a version of we will edit. So, again, what about usted? Well, I'm going to write it down here again in the third person. The plural of usted is ustedes. And again, the way that verbs follow ustedes will mimic the way that verbs follow ellos or ellas. But another interesting thing here is I wrote up here vosotros, but I'm actually going to cross this out. Although vosotros is the way to say you all in many, many formal dialects or written kind of historic Spanish, although vosotros is the way to say you all in many dialects, although vosotros is the way to say you all in certain Spanish dialects in Spain, the majority of Spanish speakers use ustedes to say you all. Now, I don't know the numbers on that. I can't say that population-wise there are more people that use ustedes versus vosotros, but it is much simpler to use ustedes, one version of you all. Edit everything over the last minute. So, ustedes, so we cut out vosotros. The reason I'm cutting out vosotros is because in many dialects of Spanish, they just use ustedes to mean you all. And that's not just for formal versions. So in the example of your boss, you're speaking to, maybe you have several bosses, and you want to say you all to them, then you would say, well, you just taught me that I need to use the usted version of you all, and I would say ustedes. But let's say you've also got some coworkers who are kind of the same level as you, and you're not formal with them. You would still say ustedes to mean you all for those individuals. So ustedes is really simple in that you can just always refer to you all as ustedes. Now again, there are certain dialects of Spanish where they use vosotros, but many, many, many dialects use ustedes to mean you all. And I think the worst case scenario you could find yourself in is that you use ustedes in a place where they use vosotros, and they understand what you were saying, even though it's not the absolute proper way. So it's really not worrying about this vosotros form. And in the future, we're going to cut this out of the instructional material and just use ustedes, which again is very similar which again is exactly similar to the third person plural they. We're going to look at exactly how this works in the next video, which will talk about a simple verb and how it's conjugated.
When you want to tell who's doing something, you can do so in Spanish by changing the ending of the verb. Here we have three different verbs. Hablar, the verb to talk or speak. Here we have aprender. In this little phrase, learning is cool. Aprender is to learn. And then abrir, to open. The reason I selected these three verbs is because we noticed that they all have different endings. So, hablar ends in AR, aprender ends in ER, and abrir ends in IR. That'll be important for knowing how to form the verbs when you're talking or when you're writing. So, for example, if we have the verb hablar, to talk, if I want to say that I talk, now in English we use the pronoun I talk, but in Spanish you change the ending. So we get hablo for the I form or the yo form. If you remember your subject pronouns to refer to people, this is why in Spanish you'll often hear people not use subject pronouns or names when they're addressing who's doing the action, because all that information is contained in this little ending here. So you talk, or if I want to say do you talk, or maybe you commonly would hear a question like do you speak Spanish? Hablas español? Do you speak Spanish? And so you can see here I'm coding the endings in blue so you can notice that there's kind of you have the root part of the word here, habl, and then the ending, and that corresponds to who's doing the action. Hablo, hablas. So if it's, Juan, he's speaking, habla. Juan habla español. Juan también habla portugués. Anytime we're talking about one person doing something that you're not talking to somebody, but you're talking about them, we would use this form, habla. Also, if it's formal, the usted form, right, we would also use this form. So I might ask, my boss, if he speaks Mandarin, I might say something like, habla usted mandarino. If I am talking about a group of people, and I am included in that group, I would say, for example, hablamos portugués. And if I'm addressing a large group, and I'm saying you all, or they, if I'm talking about that group, I would use this form, hablan. So again, we can see our endings, o, as, a, amos, an. And these endings are what we use whenever we have an AR verb. If we're talking in the present tense, things that are happening now, or that are habitually occurring actions. Like, I speak Spanish isn't something that's necessarily happening right now, but it's more in general. That's the way we use the present tense in Spanish. A little bit different than in English. Aprender es chévere. So learning is cool. Let's see how this changes when we have an ER verb. Go ahead and switch the colors up a little bit here. Aprender. In the yo form, I learn. The same. Aprendo. We have the O form at the end. But if it's you, if I want to know, are you learning a lot? Aprendes. ¿Aprendes mucho español en tu clase? I hope so. Aprender, if I'm referring to, he or Juan or she does something, or usted, you formal. Again, here with the orange, aprende. So we see a pattern starting to develop, right? We have the O, which is the same here. We have now es, e. So if you start to see these patterns developing, maybe you can jump ahead me here for a second and decide what the we form, or the nosotros or nosotras form, would be if we learn. And if you guessed aprendemos, you're right. And then finally, our last form here for the ellos or ellas form, they, feminine or masculine, or the ustedes form, you all. What do you think the ending will be? Aprenden, sí. They learn Spanish, aprenden español. Es muy fácil, ¿no? Okay, and so then finally we have one more group of verbs, this IR group. And it's more similar to the ER group. So if you're looking for patterns in your language here, let's take a look at the yo form. As you may have guessed, okay, abro. So change that to gray. I open. So abro la puerta, I open the door, or I'm opening the door. Maybe in general I open the door for somebody. Like I always open the door for my grandmother. Siempre le abro la puerta a mi abuela. Or maybe I'm opening the door right now. For both of those cases, I'm going to use the present tense. Abro. So what do you imagine the to form would be? And if you guessed abres, you're correct. He, she, or you formal, or it. In Spanish too, it isn't a subject. It's not a. There's no pronoun it, but you just use the verb without any subject there. And again, we have the e ending here. So abre la puerta. Ella me abre la puerta. She opens the door for me. Gracias. This one, the nosotros form. This is where the IR ending is important to know that because it is a little bit different. Instead of amos or hemos, with IR verbs we have imos. So abrimos. Abrimos la página web. We open the web page, or we're opening the web page, and what do we find? Abrimos la página web. And then the ellos, ellas, ustedes form, our last group here. Back to our ER type endings, we have abren. So for IR verbs, o, es, e, imos, en. For ER verbs, o, es, e, hemos, en. And for AR verbs, o, as, a, amos, an. And you can apply those to all sorts of other verbs. And remember, these endings that we're looking at, they all refer or correspond to the subject pronouns or the people that maybe you've seen in previous lessons. So this form here that ends in O always goes with yo. And that's, again, like I said, subject pronouns are often eliminated in Spanish because the ending of the verb tells you who's doing the action, or you relay that information through your own speech by using the different verb endings. So this as, es form corresponds to the pronoun tu. The a or e here is going to be anything like somebody's name, like Juan, or a subject pronoun like él or ella, or the formal you, usted. This form here, the we form, amos, hemos, imos. The pronoun nosotros, or if you're all females, we're all females, nosotras. And then this last group here, an, el, right? That's going to correspond to subject pronouns like ellos, feminine ellas, or the you all form, ustedes, formal or informal depending on the country, right? So those are your verbs, verb endings in the present tense. Hablar, aprender, abrir are 3 examples, but you can probably think of many more AR verbs like bailar is another example. Another ER verb like comer, to eat, or leer. Again, all you're going to be doing when you're conjugating these verbs is taking off the endings and adding, so if you want to ask somebody, do you dance? You just simply say what? Make it a question. Intonation, say bailas. Same thing with the ER verbs. It doesn't matter what kind of verb it is. The same kind of idea, just the endings are different. Or different IR verbs that you can think of. Abrir, the verb to live. Vivir. So it'd be the same idea. I live on the street. Vivo en la calle 6. Somewhere along those lines. So that would basically be how to form verbs in Spanish. Very basic present tense, regular AR, ER, and IR verbs. You'll get more complicated and you'll get some different irregularities in other verbs, but that gives you something to start with. Most nouns in Spanish can be either singular or plural. We refer to that as the concept of number or número in Spanish. So how do we go from making a word singular to plural? If we have a word that ends in a vowel, so a word like amigo, simply add an S to get amigos. If it ends in a consonant like doctor, then we simply add es and we get doctores. If you're writing the language, then you may see some spelling changes when you make a word plural. So if you have a word like lapis that ends in Z, then when you make it plural, it ends in a consonant, so you're imagining you're going to add es, the Z changes to C. For conventions of spelling, lapises. If the word ends, the last syllable of the word has an accent written on it, like canción, there's an accent over the O. When you make it plural, it loses that accent, canciones. And so there's there's nothing written there. That's pretty much it for the concept of number. It also will bleed into our adjectives and other things, but just for nouns and number, that's pretty much it. In Spanish, nouns have gender. Sometimes the gender is arbitrary, but also sometimes the gender is defined by the sex of the person or the animal that inherently has that gender. So, when a word, let's look at the word for boy, which is niño or chico. This is a masculine word, so if we put it with an article, it would be like el niño or un niño. And if we're going to make this word feminine, if we wanted to refer to the female version of a boy, or which would be a girl, here we have a niña. Okay, so we change this O to A. So we get niño and niña. So again, if this were going to be used with an article like la or una niña, la niña, we would make that feminine as well. It has to agree with the noun. This would also be the case if we were talking about doctors or médicos. So here, this man would be a médico, and this woman would be a médica. So el médico and la médica. Another word for doctor, when you're referring to the person, you use the word doctor. But notice this word doesn't end in an O, so we can't just change the O for the female version. So what do? Well, when it ends in a consonant like doctor, the feminine or the female version is going to be doctora. We can just add the A to the end there. So we have una doctora or la doctora Rodriguez ayuda al niño. So Dr. Rodriguez is helping the boy, and then we could say doctor what? Doctor Hernandez ayuda a la niña. So Dr. Hernandez is helping the girl. So what happens when it ends in a vowel for the masculine version, like artista? If we're talking about an artist, el artista. Well, for the feminine version, then it just stays the same, la artista. And this happens once in a while with these, especially that end in ista, el artista, la artista. And the same thing happens when it ends in a, not in a consonant, so any other vowel other than O. So, for example, the word for student, estudiante. Right here we have una estudiante, and here we have un estudiante, or el estudiante, or la estudiante. So the masculine and feminine version just happens purely by the article that it's with, or maybe an adjective that's describing the student. So if she's a good student, bueno, she would be buena, es una buena estudiante. So that's it for basically what happens when you have people. Also animals, we might think of, like a little cat, okay? So if it's a male cat, right, it's going to be el gato. Mi gato se llama Sammy. My male cat's name is Sammy. But if it's a female cat, maybe your cat wears a little bow or something. My cat would read, right? My female cat, mi gata, se llama Fluffy or Mercedes or something, feminine, whatever. So you get the point that if it's an animate object or human, animal, that the gender is directly related to the sex of that person. Sometimes those words change, like doctor and doctor, or niño, niña, amigo, amiga, and sometimes it's the same word regardless of the sex, artista or estudiante, and what changes would have to be things like the articles or adjectives that describe them. Like animate objects, inanimate objects like books and computers and music, etc., are also assigned a gender. Now, obviously, it doesn't relate to its biological sex because there is none there, but we still have gender nonetheless. So, for example, the word over here for book, which is libro, often words that end in O are masculine. So this would be el libro or un libro. And here the word for computer, computadora. Okay, this one ends in an A and it is feminine, la computadora. Arbitrarily assigned, but that's just kind of the way it works. So words that end in A are feminine and words that end in O are masculine. Of course, there are going to be exceptions to this because that's the way language works. So, for example, here we have mapa, but it's masculine, el mapa. There are some other cues besides O and A that can help us distinguish between if a word's going to be feminine or masculine. So, endings like ion. So, for the word for song is canción. So that would be la canción. So if it's a beautiful song, bonito, it would have to change to bonita to match. So la canción bonita es bonita. And besides the ion ending, like with words like canción, we have also ad, kind of like ty in English, like city. So here we have a ciudad. Ciudad is going to be la ciudad. La ciudad es bonita. Okay, feminine again. This ad ending is typical, generally feminine words. Other masculine cues, words that end in ma, like here we have clima, or also the word problema is very typical. These words that end in ma typically tend to come from Greek. And those words are generally masculine. El clima, el problema. So you might see that there and want to say la problema, but technically it should be el problema. Now, not all words have the Q, so this word here for movie, cine, we're going to the movie, vamos al cine, it's masculine. It ends in a vowel or other consonants. They're just arbitrarily assigned, and so you have to decide if it's masculine or feminine based on either the context clues around it or you've just memorized it. So I would recommend when you're memorizing vocabulary or learning new words that you memorize them with an article, el or la or un or una, just to keep those connections in your head between for masculine and feminine and the noun itself. So you remember that it's el cine, la ciudad, la canción, la computadora. So basically that's it for grammatical gender. Sometimes it is cueing off of the actual sex of the thing. Sometimes it's actually just looking at the word and having to know what it is, masculine or feminine. One little side note to make as you're noticing, as you learn the language, sometimes you'll also notice that pairs of words that were brought into the language, one was assigned the masculine gender and the other the feminine. So the words for day and night, we get el día and la noche. And then other words, like the word for sea, which is mar, you'll hear some people say el mar, and you'll hear other people say la mar. So it depends on your dialect, maybe, or just what you learned growing up. ¿De dónde es usted? Yo, pues, soy de los Estados Unidos. Where are you from? I'm from the United States. ¿De dónde soy? Es de los Estados Unidos. Where am I from? You are from the U.S. One of the most common verbs used in Spanish is the verb ser, to be, and it's probably similar in English as well. The difference in Spanish that you'll learn later is that ser is just one of the verbs to be. We'll also look at the verb estar, but for now we'll talk about the forms of the verb ser and how, in what context it's most appropriately used. So here in this first example, we see that we're talking about, we're asking about where somebody's from, so something like origin. So this is a context when ser is employed. De donde soy, where am I from? You can notice as we go through these examples the different forms of the verb ser. Es de los Estados Unidos. Why did I use the form es here for you are? Well, if we remember, the usted form is formal. Okay, so this is the usted form of the verb ser. Soy grande, rápido y feroz. What are you like? I am big, fast, and fierce. So now, in these forms of ser, we're talking about what somebody is like. We can talk about their physical appearance, their general size, color, shape, quickness, and any sort of general characteristics of what they look like or just are like in general, like feroz, personality, fierce, right? And remember that adjectives have to match the gender of the person, masculine or feminine. So if I'm a male, then I'm rápido. If you're a female, then you would say that you are rápida, if that's the case. And let's notice, right, some more forms of ser. So we see, before we had es for the usted form of you, but when it's what is the eres form? This is the tu form of ser. So we use eres for that. Again, soy is still the yo form. Remembering again also that the tu form is the informal form. But let's pretend again for a moment that we are not talking to a fierce, quick, and large tiger, but instead that we are talking about a fierce, quick, and big tiger. So when you're forming verbs, you'll always notice that the usted form is the same as the el and ella form. So how would I ask the question, what is the tiger like? We'll say the tiger is el tigre. So which form of ser would I use? The form, the usted form, right? Es como es this el tigre. And then the answer, we want to say he is. We wouldn't even need to include the pronoun here because it would be obvious we're talking about the tiger. Como es el tigre? Es grande, rápido y feroz. If we decided that it's a female tiger, como es la tigre, then we would write el. Instead, we would have ella if we use the pronoun. Ella es grande, but not rápido. We would have to make this rápida y feroz. We deal more explicitly with the feminine masculine thing with adjectives in the specific video on gender and adjectives. Check that out. Okay, so just to sum up so far, we've seen 3 different forms of the verb ser. We've seen soy, eres, and es. Soy, meaning I am. Eres, meaning you are, used in an informal way. Singular you, one person you are. And then es, we've seen, can work with a lot of different things, like, for example, you are, formally, he is, she is, right? We could also, it is, right? So these cover the singular forms of ser, but what happens when we have more than one person involved, right? ¿Cuál es su profesión? Somos ingenieros. ¿Y ustedes? ¿Son analistas? So now we're talking about professions. What's your profession? ¿Cuál es su profesión? Somos ingenieros. We're engineers. ¿Y ustedes? ¿Son analistas? And you guys? Are you analysts? So we see different uses of the form ser. Here in the first sentence, what is your profession? So your profession, singular subject. So what is it? We are, somos. So this is the form that goes with nosotros. We are engineers. So you notice the adjective, or not the adjective, but the profession, the noun engineers, agrees in number. Since it's we, it's plural. We assume if there's at least one man in the group that it will be, we'll use the masculine form as the default. So then you guys, are you, son, analysts. So the ustedes form, are you guys analysts? If you were in Spain and it was an informal group, you would use the form sois, the vosotros form. But son, the ustedes form, we know is also the same as the ellos form or the ellas form. So if we weren't talking to people, but we were talking about people, so if we were maybe asking what's their profession, we want to know what they are, and we would say they are, son analistas. Notice this word that ends in a, like artista is another one of these nouns. It doesn't change, the a doesn't change when the word naturally ends in a. So we just make it plural, analistas, because we're talking about they. This form son, right, could be ellos are, they are, or if it was all females, it would be ellas, son analistas. So to recall and summarize the plural forms of ser, we have somos, sois if you're in Spain, and only, and then son. So somos, we are. Sois would be you all are. Son could also be you all are. The ustedes form, or it could be they are. Okay, we can add these to our singular forms, and we get the forms of ser here to memorize. Soy, eres, es, somos, sois, son. Now that we have our forms of ser, let's take a look at its use in a couple more basic contexts. Ser is also useful in talking about dates and time. So, ¿cuál es la fecha de hoy? Something like, hoy es el 7 de marzo. Okay, and time as well. ¿Qué hora es? What time is it? In this case, son las 10:10. Along with date and time, ser is also useful in a number of other expressions or questions that begin with cuál, like, for example, ¿cuál es tu nombre, your name, tu número de teléfono, your phone number, tu dirección, your address, tu dirección de correo electrónico, your email address, even tu fecha de nacimiento, your birthday, tu color preferido, your favorite color. So you get the point that you can come up with a lot of common questions using the verb ser with here the question word cuál es. Okay, so all in all, the forms of ser are going to be really helpful to get you talking here right away about a lot of different things, about descriptions, specifically things related to like qualities of personality or appearance of nouns. Also use it to talk about origin, where you're from, or where someone else is from, or when you're telling what you do for a living. It'll also be useful when you're talking about the day and time. And it's useful in these questions like that begin with cuál es, that you can get a lot of personal information out of people when you first meet them.
Sometimes we use words to describe actions. These are words that are used to modify the verb in a sentence, and they're called adverbs. And basically they just tell us information about the action we're talking about. And some of the adverbs we use are adverbs that tell us where things are. So, for example, you know the verb estar, right? Estar means to be. So we have a ball here, and we want to say where the ball is. So this will depend on where the person speaking is located and the relationship between the person and the thing. So we have in English here and there, right? So if Juan is standing right here, he's going to say the ball is here. So in Spanish, this would be aquí, or you can also say acá. Both mean here, and you can use either one. But then, if Maria is standing right here, she might not say the ball is here, but she might say the ball is there. So then Maria would say, la bola está ahí, it's there. Or she can say, la bola está allí, there. So both of these also mean there, and you can use either one. And now, something that's interesting is that in Spanish we have another word, and say that Pedro is standing right here. He's kind of far away from the ball. So he would say, la bola está allá. And allá is something that would mean over there. So in English we don't have one word, but this would be translated as the ball is over there. And so we can also use the adverbs that tell us distance. For example, these two people might say, la bola está cerca, which means it's close or nearby. And this guy over here would probably say, la bola está lejos. The ball is far away. So now you know all these words that you can use with the verb estar, to be, right? To talk about where things are. You can say, la bola está aquí, the ball is here. La bola está ahí, it's there. Or la bola está allá, over there. And you could also say, está cerca or está lejos. It's nearby or it's far away. Now, there are other words that you've already heard that are used with the verb estar to modify the action or how you're doing. So if somebody asks you, ¿Cómo estás?, for example, then the answer would be, estoy bien, or estoy mal. So estoy bien, I am fine, I'm doing well, or estoy mal, I am doing badly. Okay? So these are the basic ways to respond to this question, but you can also say I'm doing very well or I'm doing very badly. So how do we say this in Spanish? We say estoy muy bien. Estoy muy bien or estoy muy mal, I'm doing very badly. So these are also adverbs because they modify the action, right? Estoy muy mal. And then another one that's useful is you can say I'm doing pretty well or pretty bad, which would be bastante. Estoy bastante bien, doing pretty well. Or you can say estoy bastante mal. Okay, now we're going to see that these words, muy and bastante, are also used with the other adverbs we learned, like lejos and cerca. So remember when we talked about distance, we said there are two words, cerca, close, or lejos, far away. So then we can also say, like this person here could say, la bola está muy cerca. The ball is very close. And this person here could say, the ball is pretty close, so está bastante cerca. And then we learned the word lejos, right? Far away. So this person here could say, la bola está muy lejos. It's very far away. Or you could also say, la bola está bastante lejos. It's pretty far away. Now we just talked about the word muy, right? There's another word that is often confused with muy, and it's mucho. And so what is the difference between muy and mucho? Well, muy, we saw that it means very, like estoy muy bien, I'm doing very well. And mucho, on the other hand, is used to mean a lot. So we'll see some differences here. Like, for example, if we're talking about how much a person works, we can say, for example, Juan works a lot. Juan trabaja mucho, right? And the opposite of that would be Juan trabaja poco. Or you can also say un poco. He works little or he works a little. So you would use mucho when in English you would use a lot. Juan trabaja mucho, Juan works a lot. But if you were saying, for example, Juan works very well, then you could say Juan trabaja muy Muy bien. So very well. So that would be the difference between mucho and muy. Basically, mucho is a lot and muy is very. Some other examples might be like Juan come mucho, which means Juan eats a lot. Or you can say Juan come poco. He eats little. He doesn't eat a lot. But then you can also say Juan come muy poco. This would be Juan eats very little. So muy and mucho are used in similar ways as in English when we use very and a lot. And you'll see that these words are used a lot for many different reasons, and we'll talk more about those later. When we want to ask questions, we use interrogative words or question words, and there are some that you've probably already seen. For example, we have como, which means how, and you've seen the question, ¿Cómo estás? How are you? Another question word we have is ¿Quién? ¿Quién means who? So, an example would be ¿Quién es él? Who is he? Now, something that we have to be careful with is that ¿quién also has the form ¿quiénes?, which in English we could say means something like who all. So, for example, if we want to say who all comes or goes to the party, we could say ¿Quiénes van a la fiesta? So who all goes or is going to the party? That would be plural. Now you'll notice that in English we only have one question mark right at the end, whereas in Spanish we have two. We have the upside down question mark at the beginning of the sentence as well as the regular question mark at the end. And something else that is important is that all of these question words in Spanish have an accent. Notice como has an accent, quién has an accent, and quién is here has an accent as well. Another interrogative word is cuándo, which means when. So, for example, we can ask, ¿Cuándo es la fiesta? When is the party? And another one we have is ¿por qué? ¿Por qué means why. So, for example, a question would be ¿Por qué trabajas hoy? Why do you work today? And once again, notice that in Spanish we have an accent on every question word. Cuando has an accent, and por qué has an accent. Another question word we have is cuánto. And cuánto means how much. For example, I can ask, ¿Cuánto dinero tienes? How much money do you have? Now, what's important to notice is that cuánto also has a feminine form, cuánta. So dinero is masculine, so we said ¿Cuánto dinero tienes? Now if I said ¿Cuánta plata tienes? Plata also means money. It means silver, but it's used to mean money, and it's feminine. So then we have to say ¿Cuánta plata tienes? And then we have another word which is similar, ¿Cuántos this means how many. So cuantos also has a feminine word, which would be cuantas. So if we're asking how many kids do you have or how many sons do you have, it would be cuántos hijos tienes. Hijos is masculine, right? So cuántos is going to be masculine. But if I'm asking how many daughters do you have, then it would be cuántas hijas tienes. So hijas is feminine, so cuántas is feminine. So remember, cuánto or cuánta means how much, and then cuántos or cuántas means how many. Another useful question word is donde, and donde means where. So you can ask, ¿Dónde es la fiesta? Where is the party? And there's some variations of donde. We have a dónde, which means to where or where to. For example, a dónde vas? Where do you go or where are you going? And then another one is de dónde, which means from where or where from. So, for example, de dónde eres? Where are you from? And once again, notice the accents on these question words. ¿Dónde? ¿A dónde? ¿De dónde? Finally, some important question words are ¿qué and cuál? ¿Qué means what? And cuál usually means which. So, for example, with ¿qué, you can ask a question like ¿qué hora es? What time is it? And with cuál, if I give you like a selection of books, you can say ¿cuál libro quieres? Which book do you want? Now, cuál also changes and it becomes plural. So we have cuáles, which we can translate as which ones. So if the question were like, of these books, which ones do you want? Then we would say ¿cuáles libros quieres? Which books do you want? Now the reason I left ¿qué and cuál for the end is that even though ¿qué usually we use to mean what, and cuál usually means which, these two interrogative words are not used in exactly the same ways as we use what and which in English. So we're going to see that ¿qué, for example, is used to ask definitions of things. So, for example, if I ask, ¿qué es una ciudad? ¿Qué es una ciudad? What is a city? So, this is a question asking you to define what a city is, right? To explain it to me. Or if I say, ¿qué significa casa? ¿Qué significa casa? Would be, what does house mean? Well, casa means house, so it's just asking for a broad meaning. Then ¿qué is also used before nouns when we are, you can say, identifying things, to identify things. So, for example, I can say ¿qué casa prefieres? What house do you prefer? So this is where it's a little tricky because a lot of times in English we would translate this as which house do you prefer? And another example would be ¿Qué libro lees? So what book are you reading? Or we could also in English say which book are you reading? So those are the two times when we usually use que. Now when do we use cuál? So cuál is usually used before the verb ser. So which we would conjugate as es. So for example, ¿cuál es tu número de teléfono? So, what is your phone number? So notice in English we would say what, but in Spanish we say ¿cuál es tu número de teléfono? Or you can also say ¿cuál es tu problema? What is your problem? So ¿cuál? In English we would say what is your problem, but in Spanish we say ¿cuál, which is, we usually think about it as which. And finally, like we talked about before, cuál is used when we have a selection of things. So when we are choosing between things, like if I give you two options of movies and I say which movie do you want to watch or which one do you prefer, then I would say ¿cuál película prefieres? Which movie do you prefer? And this meaning of cuál is similar to that of English which, when we have a selection or an option. And so those are basically the differences between cuál and que. And you just have to be careful because they're a little bit different from English.
In Spanish, the verb estar is another verb meaning to be, like ser, but estar is useful when talking about things like feelings, so or how you're doing in general. So let's look here. ¿Cómo estás? This is a typical question. ¿Cómo estás? Hello. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Hello, how are you? And so you may answer, right, how you're feeling. Estoy muy contento. Or just how you're doing. Estoy un poco enfermo. So contento being happy, right? The bear is happy. And here enfermo meaning sick, so a little sick. So estar is good to talk about how you're feeling and how you're doing. You can see here that there are two different forms of the verb estar. ¿Cómo estás? How are you? Is one form. The you form, you are, singular and informal. And then you respond estoy. So estoy is the yo form or the I form. I am. If the person you were asking how they're doing is formal, right, how would this change? So ¿cómo estás? Would become ¿cómo está? Usted, maybe. So está is the form for usted, but also for él and ella, okay, when you're talking about somebody. So maybe somebody is sick. Mi papá está enfermo. Or estar is useful in talking about locations. So we could ask, for example, where is the president? ¿Dónde está el presidente? So we can see here the president is not in his office. So if we wanted to express that here, el presidente no en su oficina, which form of estar would we use to talk about the president? We would say no está en su oficina. So we can use estar to talk about the location, for example, of a person, but we can also use it to talk about the location of things, like la silla, here we'll say the chair. La silla, ¿dónde está la silla? And I could use, talk about its location relative to something else, like the desk. So, la silla está al lado del escritorio. So in this case, the chair is next to the desk. But what happens if I want to talk about more than one chair? So where are the chairs? I would have to use a different form of estar, donde están las sillas, because sillas is plural, so we're talking about two things. Where are they? Donde están las sillas? And we would, then be able to describe where they are using estar. Están al lado, or a los lados del escritorio. Again, they're next to. Next to the desk. That same form of estar, están, could also be used to talk about, or, you guys could be, so for example, you could ask, like, where are you guys? ¿Dónde están ustedes? Or if you were in Spain, and it was an informal context, where are you guys? ¿Dónde estáis? The vosotros form. So then our answer to that, right, what would be the we form? That's what we have left here. Estamos. So where are we? Estamos en la oficina del presidente de los Estados Unidos. How are we doing? ¿Cómo estamos? Estamos muy contentos, pero un poco enfermos. Did you notice that when I talked about how we were doing, I said contentos because, okay, we're describing our feelings, and adjectives that end in O, remember, have to agree with the person in gender and in number. So if it's a group of people that has at least one male, it's contento, and if it's a group of people, it's plural, it's contentos with an S. So for sick, what did I say? Estamos enfermos. Again, because I'm assuming, the default at least one male and plural, more than one person. Estamos enfermos, pero contentos. Estamos enfermos, pero contentos. We are sick, but happy. Okay, so just to recap what we have so far, our forms of estar, one of the two verbs to be. We have estoy, meaning I am. Estás, you are. Está, right, you are, in a formal context. Usted, or he is, she is, it is, somebody's name, Juan is. Estamos, plural, including yourself. We are. Estáis, if you're in Spain. The informal you all are, plural, ya. Están goes with ustedes, so you are. Again, you all are. Otherwise, it would be they are. We want to think about which pronouns go with each of these verbs. Estoy would be used with yo. Right? Estás, tú, está could go with any other pronouns like él, ella, usted. Estamos, pues nosotros. Estáis, vosotros. If those were all groups of women, it would be vosotras and nosotras. And then están goes with, right, ustedes, ellos, or feminine ellas. We've explored its usefulness in talking about, temporary, kind of how you're feeling or how you're doing, or to talk about location of people and things. It can also be used to talk about other kinds of conditions. So we can see here in this little cartel, little poster, no estoy soltera, estoy en una larga relación con la diversión y la libertad. So what is she saying? She's saying, I'm not single. Okay, adjective single, and notice that it's feminine because she's a female. No estoy soltera, but right, I'm in a long-term relationship with fun and freedom. So in this case, we can talk about other conditions like your civil state. Estoy, she says, soltera, meaning single. In any other civil state, you could insert there divorciado, separado, casado. Okay, so divorced or separated or married, single. And you notice she also uses estar, so says estoy, to talk about the condition of being in a long-term relationship. So estoy en una larga relación. So remember, if we wanted to say that we're single, our form of estar would be estamos. The word single, soltero, right? But we'd have to make sure it's plural to match. Estamos solteros. If it's a group of women who are saying we're single, then we change the O to A. Estamos solteras. And finally, I wanted to draw your attention to one more common use of the verb estar. It's in a verb phrase. Well, so when I say something like, I am sleeping, in this case, this guy here is sloppily sleeping. Estoy durmiendo. It's kind of like the ing form of the verb in English, this yendo. We'll dedicate an entire video to this concept, but I just wanted to make it be known here, right? So you can use estar. You'll hear it maybe with ando. So, like if you have a verb like hablar, what are you doing? ¿Qué estás haciendo? Estoy hablando. You'll hear it that it's formed with your form of your verb estar. Estoy, estás, está, estamos, están. And then this ando or yendo form of the main verb. To say things like, I'm sleeping, or he's talking, right? Está hablando. It really is used to emphasize something that's in the progress, or in the process of happening at that very moment. Okay, so your verb estar should prove pretty useful for you here, and you'll hear it a lot as well. Your forms, estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, están. And it's especially useful for talking about, current states, about how you're feeling or doing, or other conditions like your civil state, or location where you are, where something is, and can also be used in this other verb phrase to say what you're doing, what you're in the process of doing at that moment. Now here's a visual summary of everything we've looked at. Take your quiz and see how you do with this concept. When talking about things in Spanish, like talking about people or objects or places or even concepts, it's typical to use a word like here or the with the word when you're talking about it. So we can take, for example, a word like shoe, which in Spanish is zapato, and we can say a shoe, un zapato, or the shoe, el zapato. So one thing that's interesting about Spanish is that words like people, places, things, concepts, or these nouns are typically categorized as either feminine or masculine. So the word zapato here happens to be what we consider a masculine noun, but the word for plant is going to be a feminine noun. So when we have a feminine noun, the or the we're using with it will change to agree with the word. So the word for plant here, cognate planta. So if we want to say a plant, we don't say un planta, we say una planta. And we don't say el planta. If we want to say the plant, we say la planta. For more specific information on noun gender, see the specific video on that concept. Okay, besides being masculine or feminine, these words then can be singular or plural. So we can make zapato plural by adding an S, zapatos. And what happens then to our little here? We get unos zapatos. So now this translates roughly, you don't really say shoes, you would say something like some shoes. And then the shoes, again, zapatos, we're going to get, instead of el, we get los zapatos. Okay, and the same thing for the feminine word planta. We can make it plural, again, by adding an S, so we get plantas. And if we want to say some plants, we change una to unas plantas. And if we want to say the plants, we can refer to them as las plantas. For more information on number in Spanish, see the video that specifically deals with singularity and plurality. So that's basically it for and the. So we have essentially four forms here. Un, una, unos, and unas for if it's masculine, plural, singular, plural. And then for the, we have 4 forms for masculine, feminine, masculine, plural, feminine, plural. El, los, la, las. Okay, so now let's see how you're doing with these concepts. If I told you here in the top picture we had a desk, which is an escritorio, and in the bottom picture we had a computer, we could say computadora. Of course, both of these objects can be identified by other words depending on where you are. So the word escritorio is masculine. So if I ask you to identify this, would you say un or una escritorio? And the same for computadora. If I told you that escritorio, like I said, is masculine and computadora is feminine, what would you choose? If you said un escritorio and una computadora, then you're on the right track. So then, what happens if we have more than one escritorio or more than one computadora? So if you wanted to say some desks or some computers, how would you identify these objects? Okay, you know that maybe the plural for escritorios, escritorio is escritorios, and computer, computadora is computadoras. So if you suggested that we use unos for escritorios and unas for computadoras, you're on the right track. So now what happens when we want to identify these objects using the, like as in the desk or the computer? Again, if the object is singular, we have the option between el or la. So for escritorio, what would you choose? If you think el escritorio, you are correct. And for computadora, then we have, right, la computadora. But what happens if we have, again, 2 objects or more? So in this case, if you want to say the desks, what would you say? If you said los escritorios, you are correct. And how about the computers? If you said las computadoras, you are also correct. So in summary, we have and the can be either masculine or feminine, or singular or plural. And the different forms for would then be un, una, unos, and unas. Again, with the plural of basically being something like some desks. And then the being el, la, los, and las. And there you have your basics of and the in Spanish. When you want to ask somebody how old they are, you can use this expression, ¿cuántos años tienes? This question, how old are you? Or literally, how many years do you have? ¿Cuántos años tienes? And the logical response would be something like, tengo, however many number of years, so maybe 32 años. Tengo 32 años. Literally, I have 32 years, or I'm 32 years old. If you're asking somebody how old they are, somebody that you're meeting for the first time, you may want to use the more formal form, right, of tienes. So, ¿cuántos años tiene? That would be the usted form. You could put that in a question. ¿Cuántos años tiene usted? And then again, we would expect a similar response. Tengo 32 años. This same tiene form can also be used for he or she, so to ask or talk about somebody else. So for example, how old is Vanna White? ¿Cuántos años tiene Vanna White? Again, okay, so notice the verb form tiene. And because our answer is talking about Vanna White, it would still be the same form, right? Tiene 56 años. So to change the person you're asking about or talking about, we were changing the verb tener. So these forms that we saw, tengo, for the to form, tienes, the usted form, or the el, ella form, he, she, has, okay, tiene. So, right, so tener is the verb that basically means something like to have. In this case, in Spanish, we talk about having years. In English, we say, to be a certain number of years old. So the different forms, tengo is I have, tienes, the you form, you have, tiene, you have formal, usted, or he or she has, and of course, right, it has. So tener is used in a lot of different expressions, but it's also used to just have this general meaning of possession, to have something as we would understand it in English as well. So, for example, someone might ask the question, do you guys have pets? Do you have pets? ¿Tienen ustedes mascotas? So notice the form of the verb tener, tienen. Do y'all have pets? In this case, we would respond, sí. Since they asked, do you guys, we would answer, we, right? So yes, we have, tenemos, how many? Dos. So this form of the verb tener, tenemos, we have. Tienen in this case was you have, plural. Okay, so just to recap our forms of the verb tener, meaning to have. We have the I form, the yo form, tengo, as in tengo un perro. You form, so when you're talking with a friend, do you have tienes, as in a question. As in our question, tienes mascotas? And then we have tiene, the form for usted, if you want to address somebody formally and ask them a question like, ¿Cuántos años tiene usted? Or with the he or she form, like before we mentioned that Vanna White tiene 56 años. In the nosotros form, we have tenemos, as we said before, tenemos dos perros. We have 2 dogs. If we were in Spain, we may use the form tenés, the vosotros form, you all. Maybe we'll use a little expression here, you all. Very lucky, tenés mucha suerte. And then we have the ustedes form, tienen, you all again, or they, so we could talk about the dogs here. Tienen, we could say their eyes. They have probably black eyes. Tienen los ojos negros. So that's it for our forms of tener. Tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenés, tienen. So when dealing with numbers in Spanish, it's pretty straightforward. For example, here when we're saying, how many animals do you see? ¿Cuántos animales ves? Uno, tres, seis. We don't have to worry about trying to make the number singular or plural. We don't have to worry about masculine or feminine at this point. Most of them are pretty straightforward. So one common issue is with when to use and between the numbers. So we up till the word 15, quince, the number quince. Okay, and so you're just going to write, most of this is just vocabulary, so you just memorize it, practice it, use it in different contexts. But we're just going to go, we're going through some of the issues here. Quince, 15, but then when we get to 16, now we start seeing 3 words. Diez y seis. But actually, 16 through, 29, those really usually get written out as one word. So diez, little spelling issue here, diez y seis, okay, the Z becomes a C, the YI, an accent on this E over seis, and seis, all the way up to, right, 29, again, all one word. But then when we get into the 30s, 30, these do get separated out all the way up to 99. Okay, and then when we get to 100, now that's another little snag. 100 just as a number is 100. But when you have anything with 100, for instance, 107, we use ciento in this case. Not y, just ciento, and then the number. 107. Okay, in the hundreds, we also have another little thing to attend to. For example, when we're talking about 200 through 900, 200 would be 200. We do get a little gender effect here. So if we had 200 tables, mesas are feminine. It's a feminine noun. So we would have to say 200 mesas. Yeah, and that goes all the way on up to 900, 900. Okay. In this case, it'd be 900 mesas. Okay, besides your regular numbers, you also have ordinal numbers in Spanish. Things like first, second, third, so primero, segundo, etc. So that's just vocabulary. But these are basically adjectives, right? So they have to often agree in number and in gender with whatever they're describing. So if you're first level, so nivel, right, it's masculine. And this actually brings up an interesting point with primero and third, tercero, the RO ones, before a masculine singular noun like nivel, level, we drop the O. So we get primer nivel or tercer nivel. But if it were the second level, it would be segundo nivel. Just primer and tercer. Okay, like I said, so gender is an issue here. So the word for time, vez, like how many times you've done something, vez. If it's the second time, vez is a feminine word, la vez, so would be segunda vez. Es la segunda vez. And on your, vocabulary list of ordinal numbers, you'll see they go up to 10, décimo, 10. And then that's where it's not. So really after that, you just say the number el once, el doce, el trece. When you're abbreviating these words and you're writing them out, it's common to just go like this, right? If it's a masculine word, it's coming in front of first, or if first is coming in front of a feminine word, then you would write it like that. Second, right, same idea. Segundo, segunda. And it's also just important to remember that these words, these quantifiers, cuarto, ordinal numbers go in front of the noun that they're describing. So the fourth floor, el cuarto piso, el primer día. A little usage-based issue with ordinal and cardinal numbers. So when you're talking about dates, the first day of the month can be el primero, por ejemplo, el primero de mayo. But then everything else will be the number itself. So el 2 de mayo, el 5 de mayo,
el 31 de mayo.
Okay, we can also talk about other kinds of quantifiers like, expressions that tell you how much of a quantity, right? Like what part of a quantity. So we have here like ración de queso, so a ration or a piece, of cheese. We could multiply that, right? We could use multipliers as well, like a double portion of cheese, doble ración de queso. Okay, go even further, triple ración de queso. Or maybe what I want is a kilo de queso. Hola perros, ¿cómo están? Ah, muy bien, gracias. Pues perros, ¿tienen nombres? ¿Cómo se llaman ustedes? Yo soy Clifford. Okay, so hopefully in that little exchange you picked up on the fact that we were basically talking about names, right? So the ways that we asked about different people's names was using the verb llamarse. Okay, the verb is really llamar. Se is just a little thing that's on the end that we're going to play with that goes with this certain kind of verb. So if you want to talk about yourself, your name, me llamo, right? And then you would give your name. Well, in this case, we're not really saying my name is, we're saying I call, and then myself. So that's why we don't say me llamo es, right? Me llamo es, whatever, no. Because we're saying I call myself. Mi nombre es, sure. Okay, it's important to remember that with this structure here, me llamo, we could still use a subject pronoun, yo, me llamo, with this. This is not a subject pronoun. Me is not a subject pronoun. Yo is. Yo me llamo. So going up to another form, tú, te, and then the verb llamar forms llamas. like, ¿Cómo te llamas? What's your name? Literally, what do you call yourself? So then there was one point in the conversation when Chocolate asked, what's your name? But addressed me in the usted. Se llama. And also, Chocolate talked about his sister, Churro, and said se llama when he gave her name. Se llama Churro. And tidy this board. And then at one point, Chocolate gives or better says that we are collectively called, nos llamamos, sí, nos llamamos Chocolate y Churro, or Churro y Chocolate. And then we have the final form, se llaman, when I asked the dogs what their names were. ¿Cómo se llaman ustedes? So this form can go for ellos, ellas, or ustedes. And then once again, your other forms. So here os llamáis in Spain, and then nos llamamos, se llama, te llamas, me llamo. So with the yo form, we get the pronoun me and the to form te. In the el, usted, and or ellos, ellas, ustedes forms, we get se for both of those, and then in the nosotros, we get nos. Basically, these are called reflexive pronouns. And we'll talk about reflexive verbs at length in a separate video. But for now, that's the lowdown on this verb llamarse. It's good for meeting new people, finding out people's names, and it'll also be a good segue into talking about reflexive verbs coming up.
Sometimes we want to be specific about which objects we are talking about, and so we use words like this car or these cars, those cars, etc. And so these are called demonstratives because they demonstrate which object we're talking about. And in Spanish, we have demonstrative adjectives just like in English. However, remember that in Spanish, everything is either masculine or feminine, right? So these here are cars, or coches. So if I want to talk about this car right here, then I would say este coche. And since here we have 3 cars, it's plural, and so these cars would be estos coches. Now, say that we are a little bit farther from these cars, then I would want to say that car or those cars. Well, in Spanish that would be ese coche, and the plural form would be esos coches. So we have this car, that car, this car, these cars, those cars, right? But in Spanish we also have another form, which is aquel coche. And aquel coche kind of means like that car over there. So it's kind of farther away from the car. And we have the plural form too, which would be aquellos coches. So those cars over there. Now if we want to talk about something that's feminine, such as house or casa, we would say this house, esta casa, right here, esta casa, because casa is feminine. And plural, if we're going to talk about these houses, then I would say estas casas. And then if we're a little bit farther from the house and we want to say that house, then we would say esa casa. And if it's plural, then we would say esas casas, those houses. And for this one as well, we have the third form, which means like that house over there. So in Spanish we have aquella casa. So that house over there is kind of farther out. And if it's more than one, then we would say aquellas casas, those houses over there. These demonstratives can also be used by themselves. They can be used as pronouns, which means they replace the noun. So say we're already talking about these cars, and then I just want to say this one is red, right? So I could just say este es rojo. Or if I wanted to say that one is red, then I would say ese es rojo. And the same with that one over there. I would say aquel es rojo, because we already know we're talking about cars. So then it's simple. And then we have also the plural form. So if I wanted to refer to these 2 cars, and I want to say these are fast, so then I would say estos son rápidos. These are fast. Or those are fast, then it would be esos son rápidos. Or those over there are fast, would be aquellos son rápidos. And the same thing happens with the feminine forms. So say we're already talking about these houses, and I just want to say, this one is pretty. Then I can just say, esta es bonita. Or if I want to say that one is pretty, then I would say esa es bonita. Or that one over there is pretty, that would be aquella es bonita. And we also have the plural form. So say I want to say something about these 2 houses, and I want to say these are expensive. Then I would say estas son caras. Estas son caras. Or those are expensive would be esas son caras. And finally, those over there are expensive. That would be aquellas son caras. We also have another form of these demonstratives that is the neutral form. So say we come across this thing and we don't know what it is. What is this? So we don't know if it's a thing that's going to be masculine or feminine, so I can't say que es esta or que es este because I don't know what it is. So then we have the forms esto or eso or aquello. So, for example, we have this thing and we want to say just, what is this? Then I would say, ¿qué es esto? So, see, that's a neutral form. It's neither este, which is masculine, or esta, which is feminine. It's just the neutral form. ¿Qué es esto? What is this? And if I want to say, what is that over there? Then I would say, what is that? ¿Qué es eso? And what is that over there? ¿Qué es aquello? So notice these are the same as those other forms we learned, except they ended in O, and these are the neutral forms that don't specify whether the thing is masculine or feminine. A lot of times we have verbs that have something we call direct objects. And a direct object is simply something that gets directly affected by the verb. For example, let's look at these two sentences. We eat pizza. Well, what gets affected by the verb to eat? The pizza, right? So that's the direct object. And down here, I play the piano. What gets affected by the verb to play? It's piano. So that's the direct object. And the same would be in Spanish. In Spanish, these sentences would be comemos pizza. So what gets affected by the verb comemos is pizza. That's the direct object. And down here, toco el piano. So piano is what gets affected. This is the direct object, el piano. Now in Spanish, when we have direct objects, we also have something that's called the a personal, or the personal A. So we're going to see this in a minute. Here we have a boy who is chasing a ball, a girl, and a cat. So like we have here, the verb perseguir means to chase. So in this first case, el niño persigue la bola. The boy chases the ball. So the direct object then, we know, is la bola, since it's what gets affected by the verb to chase, perseguir. Now in this example, we have the boys chasing the girl. So el niño persigue a la niña. And here is where we have the a personal. The direct object we know is la niña, right? Because she's what's getting affected by the verb perseguir. But la niña is a person, right? It's a girl. So whenever we have a person who is in the place of the direct object, or when a person is what is getting directly affected by the verb, then we have to add this a before the direct object. So el niño persigue a la niña. Now there are some exceptions also when we have animals. So for example, the boy is chasing the cat. Here would be el niño persigue el gato, right? However, often animals are kind of personified, particularly when they are pets, and we have al gato, which al is the combination of a plus el. So we are using the personal a here, even though it's not a person, it's a cat, but since it's a pet, then we often use the a anyway. So here's another example. We have this girl who is watching television, so we would say the girl is watching television, la niña ve la televisión. But if she's watching her friend here, Pedro, let's say, then we would say la niña ve a Pedro. So here we have the personal a because Pedro is a person. Or even if she said she watches her friend, ve a su amigo. We would still need to have the personal a. Another example would be if we are listening to music versus listening to a singer. to listen to the music would be escuchamos la música. And we listen to the singer would be escuchamos a la cantante. Here's the personal a. And another example is with the verb ayudar, to help. Here we can say we help the man, or we help Juan, or we help the family. I help Juan would be ayudo a Juan with the personal a. And I help the family would be ayudo a la familia, because the family is made up of people. So whenever you hear this a before a person, you know that it's because it's a direct object, and when the direct object is a person, we have to say a, the personal a. When we talk about who owns something, we use these possessives or possessive adjectives. For example, we have here a book and a chair, so we could say this is my book, or this is your book, or his book, and so that my, your, his would be the possessive. Now, in English and in Spanish, the possessives work a little bit differently. You'll notice that you'll say my book, his book, her book, so his and her change depending on the gender of the owner of the thing, right? His book versus her book. Well, in Spanish, this doesn't quite work the same. So let's see here, libro, how we would say libro for all these people. So we have here on the left the different people, and so for first person, yo, my book would be mi libro. So right here, mi libro. And if I were saying your book, then it would be tu libro. His book or her book are both su libro. There's no difference between his or her. And then our book, for nosotros, we have nuestro libro. And for vosotros, even though we don't really use that so much in Latin America, it's vuestro libro. But remember, vosotros is not that commonly used. And then ellos and ellas, it would also be su libro. That would be their book. So their book, whether it's all men or all women, it would be su libro. And their book, or, you know, y'all's book is, I guess, what it would say. You all, ustedes, is the plural form of usted, the formal you. That would be also su libro. And I guess we can add here usted, because it's the same for usted, the formal you. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Now, we're going to see that some of these change when the thing that you own is feminine. Like here, silla, the chair, is a feminine word. So we still would have mi silla, my chair, tu silla, your chair, su silla, which is his chair, her chair, or your chair, formal, and then the difference here is nuestra silla. So see how this changes, nuestro libro and nuestra silla, because silla is feminine. So it doesn't matter who or the gender of the owner of the thing, but the gender of the actual object that you own. Same thing for vuestro, it's going to be vuestra silla. And then for ellos, ellas, and ustedes, their chair or y'all's chair, it would still be su silla for both. So these are the possessive adjectives for when you're talking about possessing singular objects like one book or one chair. Now we're going to look at what happens when we have plural objects. So when we talk about owning or possessing something that is plural, such as books or chairs, we have here libros and sillas, then these possessives are going to change a little bit. So, for example, my books is now going to be mis libros. And your books, informal, is going to be tus libros. And then his book, or his books and her books, or your books, formal would be sus libros. For our books, nosotros, we would have nuestros libros, and for vosotros, vuestros libros. Then for third person plural, their books would be sus libros, and for your books plural, like y'all's books, would be sus libros as well. And now, like the same that happened in the singular form, in the plural form, in the feminine form, we're going to have some changes as well. So libros is masculine and sillas is feminine. So some stay the same and some are going to change. So here we have also mis sillas, my chairs, tus sillas, your chairs, sus sillas, his or her chairs. But then this one's going to change. Nuestras sillas, feminine, because sillas is a feminine object. And same for vuestros, it's going to be vuestras sillas. And here these are going to stay the same. Their chairs or you all's chairs. It's going to be sus. So what's important to notice here is that, like I said before, what changes is the gender and number depending on the thing that is possessed, as opposed to in English where it changes because of the gender of the person who possesses the object. So now let's see if we can practice this. So say we have a house here, una casa, and I want to say this is my house, or this is his house, or this is our house. So in Spanish we would say esta es mi casa. And his house would be esta es su casa. And this is our house would be esta es nuestra casa. So remember, casa is feminine, so nuestra has to be feminine as well. So let's look at another example. We have here a pair of shoes. So shoes is going to be plural, zapatos. So if I want to say these are my shoes, then we would say estos son mis zapatos. And if I wanted to say these are her shoes, then we would say estos son sus zapatos. So remember, it doesn't matter what the gender is of the person, whether it's his or her shoes. What matters is the thing that is being possessed. So in this case it's plural, so instead of su, it's going to be sus zapatos. And now if we're going to say these are our shoes, then we would say estos son nuestros zapatos. And nuestros, here it's masculine because zapatos is masculine as well. And finally, their shoes would be estos son sus zapatos. Estos son sus zapatos. So there you have it. Now you just have to be careful with the gender and the number of the thing that is being possessed. When the possessive adjectives sometimes follow the noun or the thing that is possessed, they change into a long form. Look at this example in English. This is my house, but this house is mine. So instead of my, since it's after the thing that is possessed, we say mine. And the same thing happens in Spanish. This is my house in Spanish would be esta es mi casa, but then we would say this house is mine, esta casa es mía. So that's the long form right there. So we're going to look at the same examples as last time, el libro, masculine, y la silla, feminine, and see what these long forms are. So remember, if I say this is my book, then it would be este es mi libro. But this book is mine would be este libro es mío. Notice the accent there. And if I say this is your book, then this book is yours would be este libro es tuyo. Now this is his book or her book. Este libro es suyo, which in English would be this book is hers or this book is his. Now for nosotros and vosotros, it's easy because these forms do not change into a different long form. It's still nuestro and vuestro. So this book is ours would be este libro es nuestro, and for vosotros it would be vuestro. And now for ellos, ellas, ustedes, we have this book is theirs would be este libro es suyo. So the same as third person singular. And then for feminine, we have some different forms, right? As usual, these are going to change, like any adjective, these are going to change to reflect that the thing you own is feminine. So this chair is mine, esta silla es mía. So here we're just going to have the feminine forms. Esta silla es tuya, it's yours. Esta silla es suya, his or hers, or yours formal, right, from usted. And then nuestro and nuestra become feminine. Nuestro becomes nuestra, and then vuestro becomes vuestra. And finally, suyo becomes suya. This book is theirs, right? Or this chair is theirs. Esta silla es suya. Now, say we're talking about some plural objects. For example, here now we're going to have libros, right? And here we're going to have sillas, chairs. So since they're plural, then these possessives have to also be plural, right? We have to agree. So we're going to see that it's simple and we just add an S. So this book is mine. These books are mine. So estos libros son míos. Vamos a agregarle la S. Son míos. Y estos libros son tuyos. These books are yours. Este libro es suyo, but estos libros son suyos. They're his or hers. Nuestro, estos libros son nuestros, y estos libros son vuestros. And then for they, or you all, it would be, estos libros son suyos. So very simple, we just add an S. And in the feminine form, it's the same. Estas sillas son mías. Estas sillas son tuyas. These chairs are yours. Estas sillas son suyas. They're his or hers. Estas sillas son nuestras. They are ours. Vuestras. And finally, suyas. So if you learn the one form, mío, tuyo, suyo, nuestro, vuestro, and suyo, then you know very easily how to make it feminine, right? You just change the O's for A's, and then to make it plural, you simply add an S. Now let's do a little bit of practice here. So we have this shirt here. We say, this is his shirt. So what would that be in Spanish? So we would have, esta es su camisa. Now, if I want to say this shirt is his, then what would we say? We would say esta camisa es suya, right? Now, let's look at another example. Here we have this pair of shoes. If I want to say these are his shoes, what would that be in Spanish? Or actually, let's do your shoes. These are your shoes. What would that be? Yeah, that would be estos son tus zapatos. And now if we want to say these shoes are yours, then that would be estos zapatos son tuyos. Okay, and finally we have some keys here, las llaves. So if I want to say these are my keys, then that would be what? Estas son mis llaves. And now if I want to say these keys are mine, then Estas llaves son mías. So notice we always agree. Here we have camisa, feminine, suya, feminine, both singular. Zapatos, masculine plural. Tuyos, masculine plural. And llaves, feminine plural. Then we have mías, feminine plural. So now if we want to say this is our dog, then what would that be in Spanish? Este es nuestro perro. And if I want to say this dog is ours, then what would that be? Este perro es nuestro. So remember, nuestro doesn't change, right? It stays the same when it goes after the noun. Okay, and one more example. Let's say these are your dogs, and your meaning plural, as in cats. These are you all's cats. How would we say that? Estos son sus gatos. Okay, and now if we want to say these cats are yours, then what would that be? Then that would be estos gatos son suyos. Suyos is plural because gatos is also plural.